Okay, greetings and welcome to the very first episode of the AltAcChats podcast. My name is Kyle Ireton. I'm one of your co-hosts along with Akhila Jayaram. I'm a second year postdoc right now at UC Davis. I study neuroscience and I'm currently focused on my transition to industry. A couple of months ago, we had the idea to start this Twitter account, AltAcChats, to facilitate teaching people how to navigate this tricky transition from the academic side of things to industry and really the plethora of alternative careers that are out there. So this podcast just was born out of that idea, and I am so excited to be a part of this today. Akhila, can I kick it over to you to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. Hi, everyone. My name is Akhila, and I am a PhD student at the University of Cambridge. I'm in my final year, and I also research on neuroscience in a way, but more in the context of neurodegenerative disorders. And I've been planning to transition out of academia as well. So here I am co-hosting this podcast episode. So we are very, very honored to have our first guest with us, Vega Shah. So Vega, over to you. Could you please introduce yourself and tell us where you are at this point in your career?
Yeah, absolutely. So I currently work as a product manager at a biotech software company called Dotmatics. They basically create software that helps you manage lab data. And you can see the linkage there with academia. So I switched from academia to industry about 4.5 years ago. And I got my PhD in genomics from University of Washington in Seattle. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. So I hope that this can be like a pretty open conversation. Just as a little more introduction, I know, the three of us just spoke about this, but just to orient. So Vega, you were one of the first people on Twitter that I was able to reach out to and connect and talk about, the AltAc transition process. I remember there being, this viral Twitter thread with some opinions that made a lot of people, I think, feel kind of discouraged about the outlook for grad students and especially postdocs in academia. And I found you to be like someone that was like very sympathetic, and you were able to offer this perspective that made me feel better about, trying to go out and embark on this new process. So again, I just really want to welcome you. Thank you so much. It's just right that you're here for the first episode. So we have a couple of questions to help guide the conversation, just as a starting point. I guess, what makes sense to me is to ask, how did you get your start in academia? And then, how did that academic story unfold for you?
Yeah, so I did my undergraduate at University of California, Berkeley, which has a long history of being a very, scientifically minded, research-driven school. So when you go there, you're kind of surrounded by it, right? There's a lot of natural beauty on the campus. You see a lot of iconic people that are teaching you, and you just feel inspired. You see parking spots for Nobel Prize winners and things like that. So it's a very inspiring campus, and it was certainly part of it. But then in a couple of my classes, I was really interested in microbial ecology, and also very interested in how we use DNA technology to study microbes in the world, right? So I started talking to a teaching assistant in one of my classes that was like, oh, you seem interested, you should come check out the lab, and we probably need help, like you could work as a technician. So it actually starts in undergrad, right? I started working in this research lab, and once you're introduced to the fact that there is higher education and you can actually get it, you can have the university pay you for it, right? That concept I did not know about until I met grad students and postdocs in that research lab. So I got a lot of really good mentorship early on. Some people just sort of recognized that I had this passion for studying both genomics and microbes, and so they encouraged that, and it was how I imagined grad school would be too. So that was what sort of really got me into it. And I still really love reading research about that topic, right? So I kind of read a lot of papers about it too, even though it's not part of my job anymore. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, and that's a good point. Like, you have such a unique insight with your expertise. I totally relate to that. Still, like, having that interest in the cutting edge of the field. I guess I was curious, would you mind talking about, let's see, I don't want to skip ahead too far, but when you went from like grad school, did you transition to a postdoc before you went to industry, just to orient?
Yeah, absolutely. So after I finished my PhD, I did originally sort of apply to industry positions, but what I was presenting was so unrefined and so not informed by anything real that I was still kind of interviewing as if I was interviewing for a postdoc, right? So my resume and CV were very much like an academic resume and CV. So I applied to a good mix of both. Right after my PhD, I applied to both industry and postdocs. I had like massive success in postdocs and very little success with industry positions the first round because it was an academic CV. So I had lots of interviews with postdoctoral advisors and almost none with industry. So it was like one of those interesting moments in my life where I'm like, if something's not working, stop doing the same thing. Like you have to change something. I did get lucky that I did my postdoctoral at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and the national labs are sort of sit between industry and academia, right? They're not traditional academic institutions, and their funding is not the same. It is federal funding, but it's not the same as academia. So they do a lot of collaborative work with companies in the Bay Area. And so I was able to get sort of an insight into what the private sector is like from working at LBNL. And that's really what propelled kind of my transition into industry.
For sure, that sounds like a really smart way to position yourself. I could understand maybe that wasn't your intention at the outset, but that sounds really advantageous. And definitely, one thing you brought up and something that we've emphasized a lot in the AltAc conversation is the way that we translate our academic skills and experiences, which are hugely valuable, but like the language is quite different from my impression of how it's communicated in industry and especially biotech. Akhila, could I kick it over to you?
Yes. So Vega, I think you mentioned how your stint at the national laboratories helped you transition to academia, to industry. So what were the certain things that you did, or were there any skills you picked up during that time, and what motivated you to make the final jump into industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I was at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, there was this program called the Energy ICorps. It's funded by the Department of Energy. And what they were doing was you'd have to, you apply to get in, but it's a 3-month, almost like a boot camp for scientists that want to be entrepreneurs. So effectively you think of it, you come up with a technology, and then they help you look at the value proposition. If that technology was a startup, how much money would you make from it? What market niche would it fill, right? And at the end of the program, you actually have a pitch deck and you pitch to VCs, right? So they kind of flew us out to Washington, DC, and we pitched to a bunch of VCs. And that experience, it changed. I honestly think it was like life-changing, because one of the tasks that they made us do was learn to kind of engage with people in the private sector. So we must have talked to like 50 or 60 different startups just in the Bay Area, cold calling them, right? Just messaging them on LinkedIn, or having people in your network introduce you and that say, all I want to do is ask you questions about what you're doing, right? It immediately, a couple of things clicked for me, right? There are a lot of preconceived notions about how industry is. One, that it's this very rigid corporate structure and people are like at their cubicle 9 to 5 doing work. And I found that it was not like that. I also maybe expected people to be unfriendly or not wanting to share because they're protecting their IP, but actually there was a lot of transparency. A lot of startups were very eager to talk to us and because they like communicating science. Like they're not that people who leave academia don't fall out of love with science. They simply find a different place and different tools to do it. And that to me was a very key realization, that if I left academia, I wasn't giving up on things I was passionate about. I was just doing them differently. So yeah, that program really helped me, and talking to a lot of people really helped me.
Thank you, Vega. I think it brings me back to my experience of, such a program. So we do have one in Cambridge where we, help early stage startups commercialize their technologies by doing things that you mentioned. So contacting other startup founders, talking to them about their technologies. And my experience was quite similar to what you mentioned. So just touching back on the point of the CV. So did you have to, did you rejig your CV a lot? And sort of what things did you highlight that was different from last time, like when you did the academic CV? Some light on that would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great question. And honestly, there's so many things that can kind of be changed in an academic CV to reflect kind of fit for a job in the private sector. One of the things that academics frequently do is there's one, that it's a CV, not a resume, so it's multi-page, right? But what most industry jobs, they just want to see a 2-page sort of summary. Another thing that academics frequently do is we list just the technical things, right? So we only list technical skills, and we give very high importance to degree and also to publications. They're like very high up. But what really actually matters in industry is, I think technical skills are important, obviously, but I think most PhDs are so technically proficient. You've already shown that you're good at that, right? And you've shown that you're good at doing it alone. You're very self-motivated. So what you really need to show is that you work well with other people, right? And that you're a coachable candidate, because most companies will have their own skill set that you need to learn. They need to know that you are, one, you're gonna, be able to pick up those skills, and two, you'll work well within a team. Like working well within a team is almost more important than technical proficiency in industry, right? Because if you reduce the productivity of everyone around you because you're just difficult to engage with or difficult to talk with, or your communication style isn't great, that's like a deal breaker. It doesn't matter how smart you are if you have nature paper, right? Like you won't be hired. So I started to highlight my people skills more too, like soft skills of working in a group where we were able to do cross-functional work or collaborate with a lot of people. I put my degrees lower in the resume. I started putting actual projects or experiences higher up. So, here's a project that I took on. I took it from conception of idea to execution, right? That's really what they want to know. And I had a lot of help. I started asking friends that I knew that were already in industry to look at my resume or CV, right? And since then I've done it for other people, right? Folks coming in have sent me so there is this entire network of folks that have left academia that want to help people in academia make the switch too. So that network really helped me.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think, really bringing actionable insights into your CV, as you mentioned, is quite important for those of us transitioning. And that's I'm sure it's going to be very valuable to our listeners. So I'm going to hand it back to Kyle for the next couple of questions.
Thank you. And yeah, Vega, I think you raised so many awesome points there. One of the themes that stood out is that you pointed out that so many people on the other side of the academic shall we say frontier, they're very warm. It's very friendly. I remember being so intimidated and just afraid, because I was like, oh, it's so serious, it's so different from what I've done. But the reception has really been incredible, both on Twitter and then in follow-up conversations, and a lot of people are very receptive. So thank you for highlighting that. I think that you nailed a lot of the key points here. I think I'm gonna combine the next two questions into one. So your first job when you transitioned from your postdoc to AltAc, were you able to find that through the experience you described? And then what was the what was the process like, the interview and everything?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So my first job was probably the hardest to get. I remember, so once I had done the entrepreneurs program at the National Lab, I think I was pretty sure I wanted to make the switch. So I started putting a lot of energy into it. So, I rehauled my resume, I applied actively on LinkedIn and on Glassdoor. And I would also just, if someone told me about a company, I would go directly to their website and have a look. Partly because startups sometimes don't have as much reach as bigger companies in advertising roles. So if you want to know more, you kind of have to go to their website or email someone, right? I would say, and don't let this intimidate you, but I think I must have applied to 200 something positions. Of course, some of those were just very easy to apply to. You literally just submitted your resume and there wasn't too much customization necessary. But then others that I really cared about and there are companies that I was really interested in, I would cater everything to them. So I wrote a cover letter that made sense and changed my resume to highlight things that I thought were important for that company, things like that. From 200 applications, I think I got 10 on-site interviews. So there was this intense period of time when, this is pre-pandemic, so I could actually drive to their office and have lunch with everyone and often there was, so the process usually is you have a recruiter screening call first. That's a very like a check, they want to just make sure you meet certain basic requirements, right? Then you talk to usually a hiring manager. Again, it's a 30-minute phone call. And then you talk to a bunch of people, maybe team members that you would be working with. And that's important, right? It's an important thing to make a good impression on everyone. Because over the years, I've also been on the hiring side, right? I've interviewed candidates, and one veto usually is enough, right? So you have to make sure you can find common ground with everyone you talk to. And then once everyone has consensus, they're like, oh yeah, we like this person. We've chatted with them. We get good feeling. Have them come do an on-site. So then you go, and usually it's almost like half a day of interviews. One that I had was really long. It was an entire day. I gave an hour-long presentation and then Q&A after. I just presented about my postdoc project. But I thought that process has been, I've seen that exact same process with the other roles since then that I've got. Maybe the one thing that was unique about the position I did get was that it was a contract, right? So it was short, but it was at the time the only offer I had. So I think it seemed very risky, but in retrospect, not as much, because once I got my first role, it was much easier to get, after that, recruiters just started reaching out to me on their own, right? So I think people want to see at least one role on your CV, and that kind of gets you in the door, and then it really helps for future jobs. So the first one was certainly the hardest. But I honestly think right now the hiring market is so great that maybe it wouldn't even be quite as challenging as I found it, right? I think just by the sheer volume of open jobs that I see, right? And at the time, I think I found I would find things on LinkedIn, but now there's a surplus of roles. It seems again, anecdotal information. So yeah.
It does seem that a lot of people are trying to hire, and the salaries tend to go up because they need to make their offer more attractive and more competitive.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just a small follow-up before I kick it back over to Akhila. You mentioned your first position was a contract position. Would you mind explaining like the nuance of what that is compared to other positions?
Yeah, so you usually when you're a contract position, the company doesn't entirely take as much responsibility for you as they do for a full-time employee. I would say if you find a full-time role, you should choose that over a contract role. But effectively, like they don't necessarily provide you health insurance. They don't do 401k. You don't get the same benefits as their permanent employees. But the positive of doing that is if you do get a contract position, it's a nice way to be on a trial period for that company too, because sometimes what they'll do is you come on as a contractor, but then they convert you to a full-time, right? So it's sort of a trial period for both parties. You can also decide in 6 months that this isn't necessarily what you wanted, or it's not for you, and then you can go somewhere else. But now you have experience, right? And actually 6 months of experience is not inconsequential in industry, right? It is a time period when people do learn enough to go into another role. So I know there's like all this stigma about people doing short stints at companies, but I think that stigma is getting less and less. Like people are allowed to change their mind about a job, right? And I actually kind of really like that freedom. I really like that I do have a lot of options, because I think that was kind of my gripe about academia, right? If you pick tenure track, this is it. It's hard to change your mind at that point. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. One thing that has come up with the AltAc conversation is that whereas academia, it seems that your options tend to like narrow down and become more specific over time. On the other side, options really seem to open up because you have so many skills and there are so many positions. Akhila, do you want to take over whichever question you feel is best for the next one?
Yes, absolutely. So Vega, I think we would like to reflect back onto your first day in your contract job. How did you feel transitioning? What went through your mind, and how has the journey been ever since?
It's a good question. So I think the company that I was working for was a pretty small startup, but it was significantly better right off the bat because of how much effort they put into onboarding, right? So previously, my experience as a graduate student and also postdoc was that I was kind of just like, go do your thing, right? Kind of like left alone to do. And it was then up to me to go find very specific information or training, right? I had to be completely self-motivated to Google things, teach myself, and then find people that would train me. And even then, I think when I was in grad school, I found that there was a lot of reluctance to train new people because the grad students were so stressed. They just didn't want to take on the responsibility of someone, and for no reward, right? Like they're like, why would I do this? It doesn't benefit me. I saw the exact opposite in industry where folks are incentivized for mentoring and managing others. It literally is called like your leadership training, right? So the people that were supposed to onboard me were very motivated to kind of get me onboarded, but also very motivated to make me feel good about being there. So, like they took me out for lunch, we would have like social events. And I felt kind of like invited in. I felt very welcome, which made me want to work harder, and it made me want to contribute and help, right? So it was, yeah, I think I just, the level of sort of warmth and welcoming and sharing of information that I got was profoundly better than what I had experienced for years in academia.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I would also like you to touch upon how the journey has been since then. Have you
Yeah.
stayed in the startup world, or have you moved on to larger organizations?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I worked, for the first 2.5 years, I worked exclusively at startups, which was a very interesting journey, I think. Startups are really great places to learn a lot very quickly, because you just wear a lot of hats, right? And one employee does, my role in the next startup that I worked for was application scientist, which is a very customer facing role. You talk to clients, you train them on the science. I also did some bioinformatic work for the company, and I went to like conferences to present the data. So it was like a mix of scientific work, but also, product management and marketing and sales. Like I saw the entire gamut of like everything that different roles do. And then my next job after that, which is also my current role, was at a bigger company. And now it's an even bigger company because there was an acquisition and a merger. So it's like, I think I want to say like maybe 800 plus employees. So pretty big and across the world, right? So my coworkers are spread across different continents. It's very different. The roles are way more well-defined and differentiated. But I really like that too, because once I got that little taste of what everything is, I was able to hone in on what I really liked doing and also where my personality seemed to fit. So now I'm a product manager, but without my previous experience doing a lot of different things at a startup, I probably wouldn't know, where to direct my career now. So I think I'm really happy in my current role, and every day is like a different challenge. So I'm never bored, and I really like that. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it. So trying to, define your career using your initial experiences. I think I have a small follow-up question to ask before I pass it back to Kyle. So just wanted to hear your thoughts on how you dealt with, gaining these new customer-facing skills and also marketing and so on, because usually in academia, you're not really, oriented to these topics. So did you have to take on extra training? Was it provided by the company? Any thoughts on that would be much appreciated.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So academics think that they don't have customer facing experience, but if you ever happen to teach a class or, help with teaching a class, think of that as customer service actually, because you are the actual things that you're doing are very similar to teaching a class, right? Or TAing a class. You're keeping up the website, you're communicating with them about the syllabus and what they need to study. Sometimes someone will want to regrade and they'll email you. You have to respond to them within a certain window of time. Those are all like customer service tasks, right? You just take the same things and you put them in a different scenario. Marketing, I think that one is it certainly like it's like almost like an art form, and a lot of it you kind of learn on the job. So you kind of talk to leadership and they guide it. So you learn a lot from interacting with people. But then I think also like doing things like AltAcC or like maintaining a Twitter, that is like maintaining a really polished LinkedIn page. Those are very much like marketing tasks too. So the key is to switch, like in your brain, like think of like what you're doing as, oh, this is actually what I would be doing. But then there's more formal training too, which companies will pay for. So I did get product management courses, and I haven't gotten, at my last role, we had a seminar about marketing, like someone internally gave it. And then we also had the option for the company to reimburse us if we wanted to take any course. And most companies will, like if you want to take on the job training, most companies will help you pay for it or pay for it entirely, because it's to their advantage that you stay and grow with the company, right?
Thank you for sharing. I really like the mix between, transferable skills and on-the-job training as well as more formal training. So back to you, Kyle, for the final few questions and wrapping up the podcast.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was a really good follow-up. I want to improvise a little bit on the question too, because I think, if I were an audience member, I would be super interested in what are the roles out there in industry? What are they like? And I feel like you can speak really well, Vega, to not just your current position, but the other positions that you've had experience with. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind describing like a bit more about what it means to be a product manager and really any other roles that you're interested in or would like to share.
Yeah, absolutely. How to describe a product manager. So I've heard this description secondhand, but product managers are often, like, if you look at a company and divide the products into little smaller companies within the company, then product managers are like tiny little CEOs managing each product, right? Because you go talk to clients and you find a need in the market for something, and you also talk to clients to see what problem can be solved with that product. You come back and then you talk to so in my case, I'm a software product manager, so I work with developers, and so I discuss with them what's feasible, what they can build that we can give to clients. And then I maintain something called a roadmap, which is effectively like, what is the company going to do in terms of that product today, tomorrow, and then like 8 months down the line or next year. So I maintain this sort of vision of the product, right? So where is it going? And because it's like almost like a laterally functioning role, I have to invite people into the vision to convince everyone in development and in sales and the leadership that this is what we need to do. So it's a very sort of soft skills, but also sort of hard, like technical skills, because the most convincing tool often is like metrics. So you collect data on why something should be done. It could be like, oh, we'll solve this really big problem, or this is how much revenue we'll make if we put this tool into action. And then once that whatever feature or tool you created is out there, you're also responsible for seeing how well it's doing, right? So you have to go out and collect metrics on how much people are using it. You survey them, and so it's like quantitative and qualitative feedback from clients, like how much do they like it, and then you come back and you present that to the sort of larger group, and it affects decisions, right? So someone in leadership is probably taking all that information from lots of product managers to make decisions about the company, and so it's a very multifunctional role, and it's often like, I think the hard part is that you have a lot of responsibility with zero authority, right? So you can never really go tell someone and say, hey, do this, like I think you should do this, please do it. You're almost always like inviting them into your vision, you're convincing them, right? You're never telling them. So that's what the fun part and the challenging part of the job. But yeah, I really like doing it. It's great if you're somewhat extrovert and like social. I like talking to people, so that probably helps.
Absolutely. I love that phrase that you're using, inviting them into your vision. That's a really nice way to describe it, I think. I'm struck by how familiar the process of, a roadmap and this whole development sounds to like coming up with the research plan, maybe early in grad school, right?
Yeah.
And then, getting PIs on board, getting your committee on board, sharing your findings with the lab and everything. So yeah. That's awesome.
I would say that's why PhDs make really good product managers, because you take things from ideas to something on paper and then to execution and real information, right? That really is product management. You have an idea, you stack it up with other ideas, or you get more data from outside, whether this idea is good or not, and then you execute on it. You produce something real. So I think PhDs make really great product managers.
That sounds really cool and appealing. I think it sounds like a really fulfilling job. I'm really happy for you. Thank you for sharing that description with us specifically. Let's see. So we have a couple more questions that we had in mind. I guess, at this point, I'd be interested in turning to if you had to like go back and like coach yourself in the past, or someone in your shoes, what kind of advice would you wish that you would have heard?
Yeah, I think that I spent a lot of time just sort of letting people limit my options. So I got a lot of advice from just academics, because that's who I knew, right? That was my circle. So all the career advice I got was, this is it. Like, this is, you go to postdoc, then you go to another postdoc, then you apply to tenure track. If you don't like that, maybe you can go to one of the national labs and just be a staff scientist. But there was this whole other world of, like biotech companies and life sciences and in the private sector that when I was in grad school, it wasn't even a topic. Like, no one mentioned it. I didn't know it applied. And often I thought it didn't, because my PhD was in genomics, but it was sort of environmental. So I felt like there's no way I have skills that actually are useful for these fields. So I wish that I had talked to more people outside my bubble. I had stepped out of that comfort zone, because then I would have, a lot of those like light bulb events would have happened sooner. And I honestly would have been like kinder to myself, because a lot of things in academia are stressful, not just because of the feedback we're getting from others, but also how hard graduate students are on themselves, right? The standards, the impossible standards we create for ourselves are like part of the mental health struggle. So yeah, just don't worry about, I feel like there were so many times when I would overwork myself in lab, and in retrospect, the difference in timeline was so inconsequential that I could have just taken a break, right?
I relate to that personally so much. Thank you so much for just explaining all that and laying it bare. I think that what you're doing, offering this perspective now, is a gift to so many people that will be able to gain benefit from that. So thank you for your generosity in that way. Akhila, do you want to follow up on that or anything else?
I think I don't have any specific questions, but I mean, we always like to give our speakers the space to share any other reflections that we might have not captured in our questions. Anything else you want to share with our listeners, Vega?
Yeah, so actually, maybe just following up on a question that Kyle asked earlier, which was, what are some other roles that you could do in industry? And I can tell you, because I've seen the entire sort of spectrum of people with PhDs working in industry, and there are just so many roles. Like, everything I list today will not be exhaustive whatsoever, but you've heard about application science and you've heard about product management. That was my route. But a lot of people just go, the route of staying in technical role, but then becoming leadership, some like managing people. So they just sort of grow in that way. Some people go on to marketing roles. Some people go into technical sales. So that's actually a lot of science communication as well. And then I know folks that went into technical writing. And then I actually know at least 2 people that are now technical recruiters that have a background in PhD. And actually that's, to me at the time it was surprising, but it makes complete sense. We need more recruiters that understand the PhD experience, because recruiters play such a key intermediate role, right? My first role when I switched out, the recruiter was extremely sort of kind and was like coaching me often, like helping me do better at the interviews. So we need people like that have that empathy for folks that are coming from academia, that they're probably burnt out and probably have, are dealing with some level of like low self-esteem, because that process really beats you down. We need recruiters that empathize with that and like help candidates kind of go through that process. So yeah, tons of roles. I think someone on Twitter mentioned a really important one, which is regulatory roles, very key in the drug and pharmaceutical industry and biotech as well. So yeah, it's just tons of things you can do. Often it's a match of like, what's your technical strength, but also where your personality fits. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for describing all those different roles. There are so many things out there. I feel like some of those I might have been a little familiar with, after like dipping my toes in the water a bit, but I feel like there's so much more for me to learn and for so many people to learn. I really appreciate you bringing up the theme of empathy. It's hard to, I think, like step out of the academic perspective. I know you described that from your perspective as well. It's hard to like put your trust in other people. I guess, one of the resounding things that I want to come across to anyone that listens to this is that the reception has been so good and so kind from people like you, Vega, and from so many other people that I've talked to on the other side. I just want to encourage everyone to try to subvert, that fear of the unknown, and branch out to anyone that you think looks like they're reasonably kind on Twitter, on LinkedIn, whatever platform, friends from grad school, and yeah, see if you can form these connections. That wasn't really a question, that was maybe a bit of a ramble, but yeah, any other thoughts, feelings on that at this point?
I would agree. I mean, honestly, people I work with, quite a few of them do similar sort of mentorship and communication with folks that are in academia. So I would say people that are in industry that made the switch are more leaning towards helping people than not, I would say. So if you are worried about not finding a kind reception, I would say you would, like, I think it would be you would find them helpful, because probably their helpfulness is what makes them successful in their current role as well, right? Like that's one of the things that really helps you in an industry role, how well you work with other people. And are you kind? Are you empathetic? Can you relate to other people? So.
Sorry, I got stuck on mute there. Yes, brilliant. I just want to thank you, Vega, so much for coming on, for taking up the mantle of being our first guest. I'm so pleased personally and just so happy. Akhila?
Yeah, thank you again, Vega, from my side. It was really insightful to hear your thoughts on your transition and your current job, and also the opportunities available for grad students as well as postdocs who are considering the transition to industry. So thank you so much for giving your time, and we hope to stay in touch.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. It was nice talking to both of you.